Flack Talk with James Canning, the podcast with the inside scoop on journalists from San Diego and across the nation. If you're a communications pro, have a nose for news, or you're just nosy, this is the podcast for you. Now here's your host, James Canning.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Flack Talk. I am really looking forward to today's conversation with the one, the only, Mara MacDonald, reporter with WDIV Channel 4. She's been there a while. I've known her for years, and she covers everything from politics to the funny stories that you see. But the politics beat, the 11 o'clock, the one in which she's in that truck really late at night, that's the one, that's the thing that we're going to talk about today. Hey, Mara, thanks for joining me.
Canning, you're making me sound like I'm 100. I'm okay with it, because it's actually kind of accurate, but yeah, I guess I am 100.
No, you are not. This woman is not 100. She likes good Chanel bags and always dresses impeccably, but she is not an influencer. She is a true blue journalist, and that's one of the reasons that I really wanted to have her on this show. Mara and I go back to my Detroit days. I worked for the mayor, the county executive there, and Mara was one of these reporters that just gave it to me straight. She called me on my bullshit. She'd tell me when she didn't believe the people I was talking to. Again, I never lie. We never lied. But Mara, is supposed to be a little skeptical, a little cynical. But she gave me a sense of you can be real with a journalist, and a journalist can be real with a PR person. And I've always appreciated that about you, Mara.
Well, I always appreciated about that too, about you, simply because, I deal with a lot of people like you do all day, every day, and you know who's legit, and you know who's telling you the truth, and you know who's obfuscating. And I understand your job, especially when you're repping high-profile politicos. But I know that if I called you and I pinned you down on something, that you weren't going to lie. And that's important. You have to have that kind of relationship. I think so. I mean, and that kind of relationship, I think, goes both ways.
I agree. It has to. You have to be able to have that give and take, that back and forth with journalists. You can't be afraid.
Right. And are there people that I wouldn't, let across the threshold of my home? You bet. I would let across the threshold.
Well, thank you
of my
very
home.
much. Thank you.
Well, because you're good and decent and the best, and you want the best. You are a force for good, even if maybe your bosses are potentially not.
Oh man, Mara has stories, folks. Mara has stories. Maybe we'll get into some of those. But this show is about Mara. And Mara MacDonald, who's been a journalist for many years in Detroit, kind of homegrown talent there. I want to talk about you and your career, right? Because I've really appreciated, like I said, you and the other journalists that I've had the opportunity to work with. You all keep me employed.
On your toes.
And on my toes. That's really important, especially after all these years I've been doing this. But let's talk about you. I want to know, when I go back, I always do my homework. We've known each other for years, but I do my homework, and I never knew this part, and it makes sense in some of the political stuff that you work on, but diplomacy and foreign affairs, that's your degree from Miami University in Ohio. How did you go from that to journalism, television journalism? Did you always know you wanted to do television journalism, or how did you get into it?
So I always was interested in TV news. I grew up in a family where you always watched the local evening news and then you watched the national news. So that was a basic in our house. And I was fascinated by the stories they told and the places they went, and that they were, covering the events of the day that shaped our world. I went to university with no math skills. Let's just be honest. And I knew that I, was never going to go into finance, but could I potentially go into law? I thought about taking the Foreign Service exam, but always in the back of my mind, I thought I would like to be a reporter, but it seems like it's such a hard thing to achieve, and I don't know how I would go about it. So, when you're 21, you're invincible, and I graduated from school, and I thought, Why not try? I can always go to law school. I can always take the foreign service exam. Let me see if I can do this. So I moved back home after school, and I used every contact I could, which the one that worked for me was a long-term reporter at the ABC affiliate here, who made me call her every day for a month.
Why?
And leave a voicemail that said, Mrs. Choden, this is Mara MacDonald. I really want to be a reporter. This is what I want to do. I hope you can help me. She that was her way of weeding out the I want to be a TV reporter people.
Yeah.
And I did it. And I called her every day for a month, left the voicemail like she asked me to, told her why I wanted to do this. And in the end, she helped me get an internship at one of the stations in Detroit. And they ended up hiring me to run their assignment desk. For people who don't know what that is, it's the central hub of a newsroom where the news tips come in, and you dispatch crews, and you help make editorial decisions on where people need to go. It's like, you're moving your chess pieces across the board.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with the idea of a newsroom and the pace and the deadlines and the excitement. That it just sort of stuck. That's
a great story. Like, I did, I knew things about you, but I didn't know you actually worked an assignment desk. Like, I was just like, Amara, she's like going to be on TV. I didn't realize the assignment desk. So you kind of worked your way through the internship, but you went a couple other places before you came back to come to DIV in Detroit. Is that right?
Right. I mean, no one starts in a market the size of Detroit on television, because you just don't. And I started at the state capitol in Michigan, which was a really good intro into covering politics. And then I worked for all the affiliates. I've worked for Fox, I've worked for CBS, ABC, and NBC in various towns across the country. And I'm a better reporter, actually, for my experiences in other parts of the country. But I always knew I wanted to come home because I'm an only child. My parents had me when they were older, and I love those old people. And no, I mean, I do.
No, I know. I believe you, but I love how you just say, I love those old people. Like, that's fucking great.
I do. And being able to come home here, my dad says that he likes to be like, he's from Eastern Europe. You have wasted your life coming back here. You should have gone to the network. And I could have gone to the network, but I don't regret it for one single day.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, I think that in my experience working with you, and I think that we've seen, through your reporting over the years, it's like, being from the place that you report is really helpful, right? Because you'll kind of know all the nooks and crannies of a community. And I think that, look, Detroit, as you kind of alluded to earlier, is a great news town. There's a lot of stuff that goes on there that's very interesting.
Yes. It's never dull.
Never dull. But like, would you mind sharing with our audience who's, from San Diego and across our nation? We even got some international folks. We just had a guy from Tijuana on the show recently. Can you, you've been at DIV for about 19 years or so. What are like 2 or 3 of the biggest news stories you think that come out of Detroit in that time frame? And then are these stories that you kind of had to raise your hand and say, I want that one? Or are they ones that you just got kind of assigned? Like, how does that work on those big stories like that?
So I'd say the top 3 over my career here would be the former Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick being federally indicted, essentially for running a criminal enterprise. That was intense. And that dovetails into we're at more than a decade of a federal probe into public corruption, and not just in Detroit, but in the surrounding areas of Detroit, in all its counties. It's been crazy. I don't think this happens anywhere else. And then the second thing would be Detroit declared municipal bankruptcy, which was the largest ever in the United States of America. And this town was on the precipice of no return. That was intense as well. And then the third thing I'd say, which was more recent, was the mass shooting up at Michigan State, which was awful, but different in that the shooter was at large for a substantial amount of time. Usually when we cover mass casualty events, the person responsible is either dead or in custody. This person was not. for several hours, and it made what was already a really awful situation just that much worse.
Yeah, those are huge news moments. They're all very consequential for a lot of different ways to the community and you know, in our community, the community at large. You know, as a reporter, like how do you look at those things, you know, and decide like are you hungry to want to cover that stuff, or is it like you feel bad that it's happening, and you know, especially being from there, like what happens when you see these things happening in your mind as a reporter?
First of all, if you're not in this to cover the big story, then I don't know why you're here. I'm being serious.
Yeah.
I don't understand the mentality of someone in a newsroom who just sits back and is like, oh, whatever. I don't get that. I never have. You know, when we were in the midst of that federal corruption probe with the mayor at the time, it was every day felt like you didn't know what was going to happen and you needed to have your A game on. And I thrive on that kind of energy, and I wanted to know. So yes, I always would volunteer or be the one who wants to go for that. For the municipal bankruptcy was just months and months of breaking stories and competing with the newspaper reporters, both of whom who were at the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press at the time, were exceptional reporters who have now since gone on to do other things. Mm-hmm. I will tell you that being sent to a mass casualty event is not something that I would ever choose. Yeah. But you have to. And you go in and you know what it's going to be, and you just buckle up. And I guess that night at MSU, because I am 54, there, you know, I have friends who have kids in college. Right. And covering that from a 54-year-old's perspective versus like a 27-year-old reporter are two different things. You understand, you know, my whole attitude that night was, okay, this is terrible. We have a tremendous amount of our viewing public that has children up here. They need to know what is happening, and I have to, in the most calm manner possible, explain the situation and show them what I can show them, which is why, despite having a gunman running around, my photographer and I hoofed it all over that campus. I mean, we walked for hours to show people what was there, because that's the job.
Well, and that's, you know, that's, I think, some of the things, you know, we've talked to some other folks, and I think that there's a level of like, I don't want to use the word, well, I'm going to use it, you know, like trauma or PTSD from these moments. Like, you are like kind of running toward danger in some respects when you're doing something like that. You know, is that unsettling, or is that scary? Is that, or is it just instinct at this point?
I think it's instinct, and I probably because I firmly believe that God looks after babies and fools. I never think that it's going to be us. You know, it's not going to be me or my photographer who is going to be hurt, and that we are attuned enough to our surroundings that if bad things are coming our way, that we will try and move ourselves out of harm's way. But, you know, let's not pretend that this is Ukraine. It's not. Right. Being in a war zone is a whole different vibe than covering a mass casualty event or being in a bad neighborhood where people would like to harm you. Yeah. It's a different thing. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, that's one of the things, Mar, I think is always very interesting about you. Like you know, you work that late shift. You're that 11 o'clock reporter usually. You know, I remember there was a time where like you and your photographer, like you would reference your photographer on television. You know, you guys are in that truck, you know, you're in those neighborhoods, you're doing those things. Like, what can you talk to us about, like, you know, when someone sees the WDIV truck or any
frankly, news truck rolling in. Like, what is going on in that truck? What's going on in that room? Like, sometimes you're sitting there for hours. Sometimes you guys are working. Sometimes, like, talk to me about the truck life a little bit. The news assignment truck life at night in Detroit. What's that like?
Well, first of all, I think everybody has to realize that if they do see a television live truck, that crew is usually together in a confined space for, 9 to 10 hours a day. You really get to know somebody day after day in a confined space where it's just the two of you. And I am fortunate in my career at DIV. I had one really exceptional photographer who died young from a heart complication that I almost quit after that, because that bond between that, I just didn't think I could do it anymore without Matt. But then I got cancer, which odd way was kind of the kick in the ass I needed and made me reevaluate what was important to me. Mm-hmm. And then somehow after I recovered from that and came back, I was fortunate enough to get a new photographer who is spectacular. And Eric and we are the gruesome twosome. And I cannot, when that bond in that truck works, like when it really works, when it's not just a coworker sitting there, but you have this weird ESP, it's a relationship that is like nothing else. I'm sure it's sort of like a police officer who has a long-term partner where no words need to be spoken. Mm-hmm. You just go and you just do.
Yeah. Well,
so yeah. And I mean, life inside that truck is not always pretty. But most of the time we're sitting there trying to figure out how we're going to meet our deadlines. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you like when random people come up to the truck and knock on the window and be like, "Hey, I see you on TV"? Like, so after all these years, like, does that excite you? Does it get you like, oh my gosh, these people think I'm a celebrity, or does it annoy the shit out of you? Which one?
Canning, I shop at Costco like everybody else, so I am not a celebrity. I will say this. When people come up to the truck and are like, girl, I've been watching you for 100 years. I'm like, yes, you have, because I am 100. That is nice. And I think that somebody, or if somebody sees you out on the street and they just yell, "Hey, Mara," I think that's about the nicest compliment you can get. Okay.
Yeah.
Because that means that person has a level of trust with you, that they let you into their home at 11 o'clock every night, and they want to know what you're doing. And that means something. Now, if you're going to come up to my truck window, blow smoke in my face, and use vulgarities and say something to the effect of, "Bitch, you need to hear my story," no, I'm not interested, and you can move along.
I got you. No, those are definitely two different scenarios there, and I can understand why you didn't like the latter. Yeah. You talked a little bit about vulnerability. You talked about Maddie, I think you referred to him often as, and then you mentioned, your bout with cancer, and I'm glad you've beat that. I think that, one of the reasons we started this podcast was because I got to meet a lot of journalists throughout my career, but then here in San Diego, people were talking about like their normal lives in some of my meetings, and I think that we sometimes forget that about journalists. Like you go home and have to deal with family issues or your own health things, and I want to commend you for kind of getting through that and getting back on the horse and still being there for Detroit to give them the news, because they would have missed you if you hadn't. And so thank you.
I do feel sorry for 20-year-olds starting in this business now, because it's a different environment that I think is dehumanizing, Canning. I think that, all these keyboard warriors on these various social channels, I see the things they think that are appropriate to say to these younger reporters that are just brutal, like, and they're personal.
Yeah.
like you dumb fill in the blank, you're ugly and you don't know anything and I hate your mole and blah blah blah. And I see this kind of dehumanizing abuse, and I think to myself, do you not think that these people are real?
Yeah.
Do you not think that these are people who have children and parents and go home at night? I guess I don't understand how we got, I don't know. I mean, I tell you, I don't know that I could have survived that level of abuse. I'm 100. When I started, there was no Facebook.
This lady keeps saying she's 100. She's not 100, folks. She's not 100.
Well, she's getting there. When I started, yeah, of course we had computers and the internet and whatever, but none of this 24/7 social media stuff was going on. And I am old enough now to understand where this comes from and the kind of person it comes from. And I don't let it get to me. You don't like me? Well, that's unfortunate. It's a reflection of you. I can't control your life and your anger and your whatever. I like, that doesn't even faze me. But right. I see these younger women, especially on Twitter, and they will screen cap what people send or the emails and put it out there for the world to see. And I'm thinking to myself, good God, like, how did we get to this point? This is, did your mothers not ever tell you if you don't have anything nice to say, just, shut your yap? Apparently that has been lost.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, people think, television journalism is a glamorous job. Like they see people on TV, everybody's usually pretty good looking, but like, it's not as glamorous even, I mean, obviously, like, because they're just like, TV folks are just like everybody else. They go to Costco, they do all the same stuff, but like, I mean, like, do you think that that's a misperception that like most people in their homes that are watching folks like you on TV have, is that like it's a totally glamorous thing?
What's the line from Dire Straits? Money for nothing and your checks for free. I think that there is I think there are some people who truly think that all I do is apply mascara and stand up and yammer. And if that's what they think, nothing that I say is going to be able to change what that is. But that's not what that is. And I, we have had so many interns come through the stations that I've worked at over the years. And I always know that 99% of them aren't going to get into this business, because most of them, if they start off there, I try and introduce myself and be, have some manners, because, we all weren't raised in a barn. and the first thing they will, if the first thing they ask is, who does your makeup? Or who writes your stories? That tells me that you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what this is. My job has a performance element to it because of the television aspect of it. Right. But I am a writer. I write a story. I tell a story. I dig to find out a story. Nobody is doing that for me. That is my job. That is what I am there to do. Now, am I there to do it in a manner that hopefully people at home are interested in watching? Yes. That's the difference in print. There's a performance and a visual element to it. I don't just stand there. And I think there are a lot of people who think that somehow we travel first class and someone's pouring champagne. I'm getting my hair blown out every day. And I wish all those things were happening. I think it would be great, but it's just not what it is. And it never will be. But if you love, and here's the other thing that really bugs me, Canning, is that when we have kids come in the station who want to do this, I really hate people in my job who sit there and tell some impressionable 20 or 21-year-old, oh, you don't want to do this. It's too hard. And they try and crush somebody's dream and be like, yeah, go to law school. And I hate that. Yeah. I really hate that.
Why do you think they're telling them? Why do you think those people are telling them not to do it?
Because they're bitter. And they're tired. And I get it, because you know what? Honestly, after the last 2 weeks in this town, it's been brutal. We had a 2-year-old toddler who was the subject of an Amber Alert, who was murdered, strangled to death with a cell phone cord. Like, I mean, this is just heavy, heavy stuff. And I get how it can get to you, but you need to separate yourself from that and try and compartmentalize it. I just hate these people who do that to kids, who just want to try this out. You don't do that to them.
Yeah.
If they ask you what it is, you explain, most of my day is spent on the road. I write all my own stories. Theoretically, I'm well sourced, and people call me and tell me what's going on, or I have a relationship where I can call somebody and find out what's going on, and you cover and report the news of the day. I really hate that cynicism and that, you don't want to do this, that
right.
attitude. It just sucks. Who does that? Whatever.
Well, that
it makes me mad.
Yeah, no, I fully understand that. I think it's look, the news business in general, right, is going through a huge change, right? There's a lot of, unknowns and variables. And I think there's a lot of people that, have been doing this a long time that sometimes are questioning why they're doing it. But I think what you've spoken to today is like, at the heart of it, it's that desire to tell a story. It's that desire to want to share information with people who might need it. Like you were talking about with the mass casualty up at MSU, right? You felt like there was people that needed to know that information. And I think that that's the kind of inspiration, if I'm hearing you right, that young people who want to be in this business need to hear from the elder statesmen and women of the business, right? I mean, that's, they need that kind of that comfort in knowing that their desire to tell stories counts.
Right. And if that's what you're interested in, then yes, this is something that you should consider. I posted something on socials, I think last year, because there were a whole lot of young women who had come through DIV as interns and who, I had sat them down when they were there to explain what the trajectory is here. And here's the reality, Canning. There's no test to be on TV. Okay. Mm-hmm. You're not licensed to be on TV.
Right.
What does your resume tape look like? What does your reel look like? And does that news director who's looking at it think that you are capable? That's what gets you the job.
Yep.
And they needed to hear that. And they needed to hear that, yes, there is definitely a physical appearance element to this. And anybody who tells you that there isn't is full of hooey. Now, does that mean you have to look like everybody else? No, but it means you got to be groomed. And you can't, and you can't look like, a mess. And I explained it to them look, you got to work on your delivery. You've got to work on your writing. You've got to work on, your look. You've got to work on all these things.
Yeah.
And they go to these small markets where starting television salaries are terrible. And people are like, what do you mean, Mara? Why are they terrible? I'm talking like $20,000 a year. Wow. Okay. They're terrible. You can't live on that. So you better figure it out and move up the food chain. And all these girls were going to these lousy markets to learn and getting completely discouraged and quitting. I get it. I do. But you have to look at the end game, and you have to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And if you really do have a passion for this, then you go for it. You don't just say I just can't do it.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that's a great level of advice for folks out there. I mean, we have some journalists and PR people aspiring to be them who listen to this show, and I think that's really important. And as part of the goal of what we're trying to do here is help people understand what the business is about, what it takes, the personalities, the people and the reporters that are in it. And I think what you've shared with folks is going to be really helpful for some young journalist who's trying to figure out what they're going to do. I want to get into our breaking news round soon, but we've talked a lot about great career stories and things like that. But as a journalist, how do you unwind? Because you're up late sometimes, you're up early sometimes, you see some very difficult things, but what do you think you do, or what do you need to do to unwind? And did you always know how to do that early in your career versus today?
I think that depends on your personality. And I am an introvert, which I know sounds so dumb considering what I do for a living. But when I am not at Channel 4, I do not watch television, with the exception of maybe The Witcher or something like Game of Thrones or whatever. Like that's all I'm watching. I'm not interested in news. I don't want to see it. And you're never going to find me in a bar. You're never going to find me at a concert. And it's not that I don't like music. I can't take relentless noise. I can't stand it. I can't stand cacophony. I'm around it Monday through Friday. So on my time off, I want it to be quiet. I want it to be calm, and I want to get stuff done that I need to get done. And I think that's personality dependent. Some people in this gig are super gregarious and total extroverts, and they thrive on the loud and the personal interaction. Mm-hmm. I don't. I need my space.
I got you. No, that's great. That's great. And I think I think you're, uncovering in some respects, like what people think by talking about that. I mean, anybody, no matter your personality, can be a journalist, can get into this business. It sounds like it's almost like you turn it on when you go to work. Is that accurate? Like in that must fulfill you in some way that's different than like when you want to have your downtime.
Exactly. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that knowing what you need to, I admire social butterflies. I'm not one. It exhausts me. I don't know. I don't understand how these people go out all the time and do all this. I can't take the constant barrage of people and noise and having to be on.
Yeah.
I just can't.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that and kind of opening up about that kind of stuff, because I think that's important for people to hear. We do this thing, we kind of try to dig into the psyche of a journalist in what we call the breaking news round. It's like, breaking news. And, I should probably do this thing like in the middle of the interview, but I always do it toward the end of the interview. Just because I don't know. I just want to I don't know. Hopefully gives people something to look forward to, because I think these are some really interesting questions that I've adapted from somebody else. Can we get into it? It's about like 10 questions or so. You cool with that?
Of course.
All right. Well, so Mara MacDonald, for $5,000, what is your favorite word?
Luxury.
Luxury.
What
is it about that word?
I think that it implies richness and depth and beauty, and to me it implies peace and calm. That's why.
Okay. Do you have a least favorite word?
Pain.
The word pain, or the feeling of pain.
Well, it's both. To me, there's so much pain, and that's not. It's mental. It's physical. It's the daily of some people that is just. I posted a couple of years ago for just after a week of really horrible stories that I wish life was easier for a whole lot of people, and I do, because I think there are a whole lot of people whose every day is real pain.
Yeah, that's very thoughtful. That's very interesting way to look at it. What do you think turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally? Any one of those?
Authenticity. That's what, people always say, man, I can tell when you're really invested in a story. And I just did one on some fathers here in a suburb of Detroit who have lost their children to fentanyl, and not because the kids thought they were getting high, but because they were anxious and they thought they were buying like legit Xanax because they were worried about school and worried about life and exams, and they just wanted something to help them feel normal. And they were laced with fentanyl because they were phony, and those kids died. And that their dads would come out and be honest about what happened in their homes, and try and go into schools with a program to tell these kids that, if you are anxious, if you are depressed, if you are suffering from these things, you got to tell somebody.
Right.
You can't go on Snapchat and think that, Pookie 123 is going to sell you on Snap is going to sell you a legitimate Xanax prescription.
Right. No, that's right.
So people who are authentic and real, that's what motivates me.
I gotcha. What turns you off?
What time am I off?
No, what turns you off?
Oh, what turns me off? Lack of integrity, sketchy. I can feel it, and I know that sounds like someone who wears crystals, and I don't. But I mean, no, I don't. But sincerely, I can feel malevolence. I can feel bad. I can feel it. I don't even have to see it. I can hear it. I can feel it, and I can sense it. And I just I don't want to be around it.
Okay. Mara, I know that you probably, when you use words like hooey, it makes you think that maybe you don't use these things. So I don't know. But what's your favorite curse word?
Fuck, unapologetically, and used often and a la Roy Kent and Ted Lasso. I've got a vocabulary that could curl people's hair. There's no question.
Oh man, we have to get a hold of some of them, those off mic tapes or something like that. I'm sure there's some stuff in there.
Oh yeah, there are.
What sound or noise do you love?
My mother's laugh.
That's sweet. What sound or noise do you hate?
People who walk around in public spaces yakking on their cell phones with their audio on, their speaker on. Canning, it puts me in a murderous rage. Like I just want to grab them and be like, why are you subjecting us to you yakking on this phone loudly and in public? No one wants to hear. Turn off.
That's great. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
So in my next life, I'm going to be a spa owner. I want people to feel wonderful. I want them to get rejuvenated. I want them to have a space where they can come where everything smells like eucalyptus. Nobody is awful, and they can worry only about their own self-regeneration. That's what I'm going to do.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Is there a profession that you wouldn't want to do?
I could never be a cop.
No.
I wouldn't last in that job for 5 minutes. Not only because I'm the most impatient person you probably know, but because I can't. It's bad enough that I cover it. I can't imagine seeing the up close and personal every day.
Yeah, it's a tough job. Definitely,
it's
is
an awful job. I couldn't. I mean, I told you we had that child who was found dead last week. Strangled by a mother's ex-boyfriend. Allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
And to find that little girl dumped in an alley with a pink cell phone cord wrapped around her neck. Yeah. I mean, there are some things that I don't want to see. And I don't know how the men and women in law enforcement see that stuff.
Yeah.
My heart couldn't take it.
Yeah. Mara, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Please come in.
That's good.
Mara, don't throw me in a pit. I don't want to go. Don't throw me in a fire pit.
You want to be welcomed. You want to be welcomed through the gates. I got you. Mara, this has been great. I've really enjoyed, catching up and hearing, your take on it. I think our listeners will too. I hope they do. Because you are a special reporter. You've meant a lot to me. You've taught me a lot of things in my career, just being who you are. And I think that's it's meant a lot. So thank you for even making the time. I want to give you one last chance, just as you would if, I brought a client before you or something. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our Flack Talk listeners before we close out?
Well, Canning, I would like them all to know that you will always be welcome back in the Motor City. And I think you'd be a wonderful addition if you ever decide that the sun and the sandy beaches of Cali are no longer for you, because you're the real deal. And I wish there were more of you around.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
If you liked Flack Talk and want to learn more about your favorite muckrakers and newsbreakers, please hit the subscribe button or visit flacktalk.com. New Flack Talk episodes with James Canning air every other week, wherever you get your podcasts.